Racist police officer assaulted a black woman, but regretted it bitterly after discovering the truth about her identity. Rachel walked along the bustling sidewalks of Chicago, her mind still filled with the ideas discussed in the meeting she had just left. The afternoon sun filtered between the skyscrapers, casting long shadows that danced around her. She was a respected lawyer, known for her determination and skill in advocating for social justice causes. The city, however, pulsed with underlying tensions, a mix of hopes and frustrations that hung in the air, almost palpable. As she passed by a park, Rachel noticed a group of young people playing basketball. Their laughter and energy contrasted with the weight of what was about to unfold. It was then that she spotted Michael, a police officer who frequently patrolled the area, standing off to the side with a look of inner turmoil on his face. He seemed lost, as if battling invisible demons. Feeling an odd connection to the man who, despite being a law enforcement officer, bore a visible burden, Rachel decided to approach him, perhaps hoping to understand what troubled him. "Hey Michael, how are you?" she asked, forcing a friendly smile. Michael turned, his eyes revealing a sea of confusion and anger. "You shouldn't be here, Rachel. This isn't a place for you," he replied, his voice low but heavy with a warning tone. "Why not? We're all in this city together," she insisted, a bit concerned by the hostility emanating from him. "What's going on? You seem troubled." "Troubled? You have no idea what it's like to be in my shoes," he shot back, a thread of emotion cutting through his voice. "People see me as a monster, and the truth is I don't know what to do anymore. Every day is a battle." Rachel furrowed her brow, trying to understand. "We're all fighting, Michael. Tensions are high and it's hard for all of us. But violence isn't the answer," she said, her concern growing. He took a step closer, frustration boiling over. "You talk about violence like it's something I can control. You know nothing about what it means to be a cop these days. People shout at me, curse me, and sometimes I just want to shout back." The conversation quickly escalated into a heated argument as Michael's repressed feelings emerged. Rachel, with a deep sense of empathy, tried to de-escalate the situation. "I understand you're under pressure, but that doesn't justify what you might do to someone. We need to find a way to talk, not to hurt each other. You don't understand anything. You're here in your office living your life while I'm on the front lines facing all of this," he yelled, his voice echoing through the empty street. The desperation in his eyes sent a chill down her spine. Suddenly, Michael, overwhelmed by rage, lunged at Rachel. He grabbed her arm tightly, his eyes wide. "You think you can teach me about right and wrong? I'm the one who keeps order from chaos." Rachel froze for a moment. Pain and confusion reflected on her face. "Michael, please let me go," she pleaded, her voice trembling but firm. The situation escalated rapidly. In a moment of complete loss of control, he shoved her forcefully and Rachel fell to the ground, her vision blurring as pain radiated through her body. She lost consciousness, the world around her slowly fading to black. Tyler, a young black man passing by, witnessed the whole scene from a distance. He stood with his phone in hand, hesitating between recording what was happening or rushing to help. His heart raced, feeling trapped between fear and the need to act. He didn't know what to do, but the image of Rachel collapsing burned in his memory, the brutality of what he had just witnessed leaving a deep mark on his soul, a silent scream echoing in his mind. Rachel was in her office, surrounded by piles of documents and folders. The soft light of the late afternoon streamed through the windows, but it was not enough to illuminate the darkness that hung over her mind. The memory of the assault still haunted her, and every time she closed her eyes, the image of Michael attacking her echoed in her mind. With a deep sigh, she decided she could not let this pass. In a meeting with her colleagues, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew Rachel was preparing to sue a police officer, an act that was both courageous and risky. "This isn't just about me," Rachel began, her voice strong but her gaze revealing the vulnerability she felt. "It's about all the victims who don't have a voice, about all the injustices that remain hidden. We need to fight, and we need to do it together." One of the partners, David, nodded in agreement. "You're right, Rachel, but what are you going to do? The system is complicated and it has its protections for police officers. It won't be easy." She took a deep breath, remembering the pain she felt. "I know it won't be easy, but that's why I need you. We need to expose this brutality. We can't be silent. We cannot let fear stop us from seeking justice." Meanwhile, at home, Michael was in a state of torment. He looked in the mirror, trying to confront the man who had assaulted an innocent woman. The nights were long and filled with nightmares. He repeatedly saw the scene of the assault, Rachel's terrified gaze etched in his mind. What have I done? He whispered to himself, guilt gnawing at his sanity. I'm not that man. I'm not that monster. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Samuel, a veteran officer who had always been a respected figure in the department. Michael, we need to talk, Samuel said, his grave tone reflecting the seriousness of the situation. You can't keep going like this. What happened was unacceptable. You need to face this head on. Michael looked away, shame consuming him. I know, Samuel, but what if the system protects me? What if I don't pay for what I did? That's exactly what you need to understand, Samuel replied. The system may protect you, but true justice comes from within. You need to confront your actions and their consequences, not just for yourself but for all those affected. In the outskirts of the city, Tyler sat in his room, surrounded by papers and notes. The assault he had witnessed left him paralyzed. He felt powerless but didn't want to be just a passive bystander. Picking up his phone, he began typing a message. What if I could help other young people like me find their way? What if I could be the change I want to see? He began to create an online platform, a space where young Black individuals could connect with mentors and investors, seeking opportunities and support. This could be bigger than I imagine, he thought, determination shining in his eyes. I need to do this. However, doubt still lingered. What if this doesn't work? What if no one cares? The voice in his mind echoed, but he refused to let despair take over. I can't let fear define who I am. I need to fight for my community. Meanwhile, Rachel kept working, her focus now on justice. She knew the road would be difficult, but something inside her propelled her forward. She was determined to turn her pain into a force that could change not only her life, but the lives of many others. I won't stay silent, not anymore. This is just the beginning, she murmured to herself as she prepared for her next steps. Emily was at home, the heavy silence surrounding her as she thought about what had happened. The echoes of Michael's aggression towards Rachel still resonated in her mind. It was hard to believe that the man she married, who had always supported her, could have become the center of such a violent storm. She sat at the kitchen table, the soft afternoon sunlight filtering through the windows, but she couldn't find peace. What to do now? Doubt consumed her. Emily, are you okay? Michael entered the room, a look of concern on his face. He had always been protective, but now the idea that she might be worried about him made her furious. Okay? How do you think I am? She replied, her voice trembling with emotion. You assaulted a woman, Michael. A woman we don't even know. How can you expect me to be okay? He hesitated, his words failing to come out. I don't know what happened. I lost control. I was under so much pressure, so... Under pressure? Emily interrupted, rising from her chair, her indignation overflowing. Do you think that justifies what you did? What if Rachel were our sister or a friend? What would you say then? I didn't think. I just don't know what happened to me. Michael sat down, his head bowed, struggling against tears. I'm so confused, so ashamed. Confused? She repeated, her voice now softer but filled with pain. You can't just hide behind confusion, Michael. You need to face this, take responsibility. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Tyler felt increasingly pressured. He decided to meet with a group of friends at the park to discuss what had happened. The atmosphere was tense and frustration hung in the air. We can't just stand still, guys. We need to do something, not just for Rachel, but for everyone who has suffered like this, he said, his gaze determined. One of his friends, Jamal, shook his head. But what can we do? We're just a group of young people. They have all the power. We can unite, Tyler insisted. If each of us spreads the message, we can get attention. We can't let this fade into the dust. And what if the police come after us? A girl in the group questioned, her concern evident. They won't just let this go. We need to be smart, Tyler replied. Let's use social media. Start a campaign. Something that makes people think about this. We can't let fear paralyze us. Meanwhile, Michael found himself in a counseling session with Samuel, a veteran police officer who understood the challenges and pressures of the profession well. Samuel looked at him with a mix of compassion and firmness. Do you think violence solves anything, Michael? He asked, his eyes locked onto Michael's. No, of course not, Michael replied, his voice trembling. I know I was wrong, but I can't understand why this happened. I always believed I was there to protect people. And that's why you need to understand your own demons, Samuel said, leaning forward. You need to face your inner self and figure out why you let all this pressure consume you. True strength isn't about using force. It's knowing when to hold back. Michael closed his eyes, Samuel's words penetrating his mind. He knew he needed to change, but how? The struggle seemed insurmountable. Meanwhile, Emily was determined to find a way. She decided to join a support group discussing how to promote peace and empathy between police and the community. At the first meeting, feeling insecure, she raised her hand. "I'm Emily, the wife of a police officer who assaulted a woman. I'm here because I want to understand how we can change this. How can we promote real dialogue?" Murmurs of support echoed around the room, and an elderly woman approached her. "Change begins when we have the courage to face the truth, Emily. It's important that you speak about what's happening. Empathy is the key to transformation." Emily nodded, feeling a small fire ignite within her. She knew the journey would be long and difficult, but she was willing to do whatever it took. What had happened couldn't be erased, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a path to redemption. The city of Chicago buzzed with indignation and hope. The streets, once filled with indifference, now resonated with the determination of a community coming together in the fight for justice. Rachel, after months of pain and recovery, had become a symbol of this struggle. With her name now widely recognized, she had taken on a leadership role, not just as a lawyer but as a voice for those who felt invisible. On a sunny Saturday morning, Rachel was at one of the city's busiest parks, surrounded by a group of community leaders. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. With a megaphone in hand, she prepared for a speech that could galvanize even more mobilization around her case. The crowd, made up of young and old, all holding signs demanding justice, looked at her with hope. "Friends," Rachel began, her voice strong yet filled with emotion. "Today we are here not just for me but for all those who have suffered at the hands of a system that often fails to protect the most vulnerable. We need to unite and demand change. No one should live in fear of being assaulted, whether because of their skin color, their profession, or any other reason." A murmur of support rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Justice for Rachel," and others joined in, repeating the phrase like a mantra. "We need reforms in policing practices," she continued. "We need more transparency, more dialogue between the police and the community. Guys, we are not enemies. We are partners in the quest for a safe place for everyone." As Rachel spoke, a crowd gathered around her, waving signs and shouting words of support. More and more, those who had felt disconnected from the system began to feel like part of it. Tyler, standing among the youth, watched with a mix of joy and concern. He knew that Rachel's fight was everyone's fight, but he also felt the weight of his own responsibility. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Emily, Michael's wife, struggled with a storm of emotions that consumed her. Instead of seeking refuge at home, she decided to join a community project aimed at fostering dialogue between police officers and citizens. She believed that to change reality, they needed to start talking. "Emily, do you really think this will work?" asked a confused friend, questioning her choice. "The police are on Michael's side. They won't open up to the community." "That's exactly why we need to try," Emily replied with determination in her eyes. "If we don't start having these conversations, nothing will change. We can't let hatred and anger divide us even more. We need empathy, and that starts with the willingness to listen." On the day of the project's first meeting, Emily sat at a table with several police officers and community members. The tension was palpable. One officer, an older man with a weary expression, broke the silence. "I know many of you are furious about what happened. I understand, but we need to find a way to build a bridge, not a wall. What do you suggest?" asked a young man from the group, defiantly. "How can we trust those who are supposed to protect us, but fail to do so?" Emily felt her heart race. "We need dialogue. We need to understand each other's perspectives. I'm not saying this will solve everything, but it's a start. If the police hear our stories, maybe they can see beyond the uniform." The officer looked around, clearly struggling with his own beliefs and biases. "I want to listen. I'm willing to listen. But you all must be ready to hear us too. Not all of us are bad. Many of us are also fighting against the system." Meanwhile, the mobilization around Rachel's case was growing. Protests intensified, but they were always guided by a message of peace and justice. What could have been a wave of violence transformed into a collective fight for change. Rachel, Emily, and Tyler were all connected by an invisible thread of determination. The city was waking up, and the voices that had once been silenced now echoed in unison, calling for a more just and equitable future. Michael walked the streets of Chicago, the weight of guilt in his chest like an anchor. After the assault on Rachel, his life had become a dark labyrinth of regret and confusion. He knew he needed to change, but doubt and shame consumed him. His meeting with Samuel, the veteran officer, had been a turning point. Samuel was a man of principles, someone who had seen the worst of humanity but still believed in the capacity for redemption. "You can't change what you did, Michael, but you can decide what you'll do from now on," Samuel had said during one of their meetings, his voice firm and full of experience. "True courage is facing your mistakes and working to fix them." Moved by those words, Michael decided to get involved in community activities. He volunteered at a youth center where music and laughter mingled with the scent of hope. As he entered the space, he felt a mix of nervousness and determination. The young people looked at him with curiosity, some with distrust. He knew that first impressions were crucial. "Hi everyone, I'm Michael and I'm a police officer," he began, his voice trembling. "I know many of you may have a negative view of the police. I understand. I've made mistakes and I'm here to learn from you and help in any way I can." A young man with braided hair and a challenging gaze interrupted. "How can you help us if you're part of the problem?" "You hit a woman." Michael swallowed hard. The truth of what he had done hit him like a punch to the gut. "I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, but I want to. I want to hear you, understand how you feel about me and other officers. I'm here to learn and hopefully change this story," he replied, trying to convey sincerity. Silence hung in the air for a moment until a 12-year-old girl with a notebook stood up. "My dad was wrongfully arrested. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The police don't care about us. What are you going to do about that?" Michael felt his heart tighten. He didn't have easy answers or magical solutions, but he was there to listen and learn. "I want to be part of a dialogue. I want you to share your stories so I can take them back to my police department. Change doesn't happen overnight, but together we can start," he said, looking into the girl's eyes. As Michael spoke, Tyler, who had become an advocate for social justice, was on his own path to redemption. He had been tirelessly working on his platform, connecting young people in the community with mentors and investors. The event he had planned was fast approaching, and the anticipation was palpable. In a meeting with some of the mentors, Tyler presented his ideas. The room was filled with eager faces, and he felt adrenaline coursing through his veins. "What we're trying to do here is simple but powerful. We want to create opportunities for young people who are often left behind. We need you, investors and mentors, to believe in us," he began, gesturing enthusiastically. "Rachel's story and my own show that change is possible. We need to be the voice that cries out for justice and opportunity." One mentor, a man in a well-fitted suit, raised his hand. "But how do you plan to ensure that these young people have real access to these opportunities? What makes you different from any other initiative that has failed?" Tyler took a deep breath, knowing the doubt was valid. "We're creating a support network that not only offers opportunities but also holds itself accountable for them. Each young person will have a mentor who will be a guide, someone who cares and is committed to helping. We're not just giving a chance, we're building a community," he replied, his passion shining through. The meeting ended with applause and promises of support, but Tyler knew the real work was just beginning. He was determined to make a difference not just for himself but for everyone who felt invisible and powerless. Meanwhile, Michael continued his journey, trying to find his place in a world that had been so cruel and unjust. Both, in their own ways, sought redemption in a landscape of pain and struggle, and both were willing to fight for a better future. Tyler looked at the group of young people gathered in his makeshift classroom, an old conference room he had rented with his savings. Light filtered through a dirty window, illuminating the anxious and hopeful faces of the teenagers surrounding him. He felt the heavy weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but also a flame of determination burning within him. What he had witnessed weeks ago still haunted him, but now, instead of letting himself be consumed by helplessness, he decided it was time to act. "Today, we're going to talk about responsibility and how we can make a difference," Tyler began, his voice firm yet full of empathy. "I know many of you are worried about what happened to Rachel and the police officer, but we need to remember that our voice has power. We must unite and fight, not just for ourselves, but for all the people who have suffered unjustly." The young people watched him, some with skeptical looks, others with hope. One of them, Jamal, who always seemed more reserved, hesitantly raised his hand. "But what if we don't make a difference? What can we do against such a big system?" Tyler took a deep breath, sensing the doubt hanging in the air. Every small step counts, Jamal. Look at me. I'm just an ordinary guy, but if we're all just ordinary, nothing will change. We need to be seen and heard. Let's organize an event to show that we stand united for justice. What do you think? The young people began murmuring among themselves, ideas starting to take shape. One girl, Maya, leaned forward, her eyes shining. This could work. We could invite influential people, community leaders. If they see we're serious, maybe they'll help. Exactly. Tyler smiled, excited by the energy starting to spread among the youth. We need someone who can talk about what happened to Rachel. Someone who can bring the story to light, who can make people care. As the plans began to materialize, Tyler couldn't help but think of Michael. The police officer who had assaulted Rachel was moving toward redemption, but the path wouldn't be easy. And while Tyler was focused on his event, he knew he needed to confront Michael at some point. The next day, as he prepared for the community meeting, Tyler received an unexpected message. It was from Emily, Michael's wife. His heart raced. What did she want? He hesitated but decided to respond. Hi, Emily. How can I help you? Tyler. Her message was direct. I'd like to talk. About Michael. About everything. Can I meet with you tomorrow? He looked at the screen, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Sure. What time? At 3 p.m. at the cafe on the corner. When he arrived at the cafe, Emily was sitting at a table in the back, her expression a mix of worry and determination. Tyler sat across from her, trying not to judge before the conversation. Thank you for coming, she began, her voice low. I've been reflecting a lot on what happened. Michael, he feels lost. He can't cope with the guilt of what he did. I don't know how to help him. Tyler watched her, trying to understand her pain. You know what he did was unacceptable, right? Yes, I know, Emily replied, her voice trembling. But he's not a bad person. He's fighting his own demons. I just want him to find a path to redemption. Redemption doesn't come easily, Emily. He needs to face the consequences of what he did. And if he truly wants to change, he must start by listening to the voices of the people he hurt. I want him to do that, she said, her eyes filled with tears. And I want to help build that bridge between the community and the police. I believe empathy is the first step. Tyler fell silent, pondering. If you really want to do this, maybe you should join us in the event we're organizing. It's an opportunity to dialogue, to show that we're all willing to listen. Emily nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. Yes, I want to. I want to make a difference. As they talked, Tyler felt that despite all their differences, they were both seeking the same goal, justice and understanding, and perhaps together, they could begin to forge the path for the change Chicago so desperately needed. The tension in the Chicago community intensified as Michael's trial approached. Protests, which had once been sporadic, became a constant presence in the streets. Signs with messages of justice and slogans against police brutality adorned the corners, while groups of citizens gathered to discuss strategies to ensure their voices were heard. Amid this fervor, Rachel felt the weight of her responsibilities growing with each passing day. At her desk, surrounded by legal documents and newspaper clippings, she looked out the window and saw the crowd forming in the square. The setting sun illuminated their determined faces but also reflected the unease the city felt. A colleague, Lucas, entered the room, breaking the silence. Rachel, have you seen the latest headlines? He asked, concern etched on his face. I have, she replied, not taking her eyes off the crowd. They're mobilizing. That's good, but at the same time, it's exhausting. The pressure is only increasing. Are you ready for what's coming? Lucas asked, sitting down across from her. Rachel sighed deeply, recalling the anonymous threat she had started receiving. I have no choice. I can't let fear paralyze me. Other lives depend on it. You're strong, Rachel, Lucas said, trying to encourage her. But don't forget to take care of yourself too. Meanwhile, Tyler was at home watching the growth of the protests on social media. He felt a mix of pride and anxiety. His online platform was starting to gain notoriety, but he wondered if he could balance his personal ambitions with the larger fight for justice. He sat on his bed, typing rapidly on his laptop. What do you think will happen at the trial? His friend Jamal asked, sitting next to him watching the news. I don't know, man, Tyler replied hesitantly. But if the sentence is light, it could be a hard blow for all of us. People will feel betrayed. And you? What will you do if that happens? Jamal inquired with a serious look. I'm going to mobilize. If justice isn't served, we need to be the voice that cries out for it. We can't let this go unnoticed. The atmosphere in the city was charged with expectation and anxiety. News about Rachel and Michael dominated the headlines, and the media was exploring every detail. Citizens were on high alert, and the police were preparing for possible confrontations in the streets. Rachel, for her part, was determined not to be shaken by the threats. In a meeting with her team, she laid out her strategies for the trial. "We need to ensure that the truth comes to light no matter what happens. What Michael did cannot be minimized," she stated firmly. "And what if he receives a light sentence?" questioned one of the younger lawyers, visibly anxious. "We can't think like that. We need to focus on what we can control. And that includes mobilizing the community," Rachel said, looking around at her team. "We need to be the voice of justice." Her determination was contagious, and everyone in the room felt the positive energy radiating from her. But even with the strength she displayed, there was a weight in her heart that she couldn't ignore. That night, as Rachel prepared for bed, her phone buzzed on the bedside table. It was an anonymous message. "You shouldn't be doing this. The truth isn't what you think." She hesitated, her heart racing. She stared at the screen for a moment before deciding she wouldn't let fear take over. "I will fight," she murmured to herself. "For myself and for everyone who has suffered." The next day, the city was ablaze with conflicting emotions. As Tyler left for work, he saw a group of protesters gathering on the corner. He felt a wave of determination wash over him. It was time to act. He needed to show that the struggle wasn't just Rachel's, but that of everyone who desired change. "Let's go together," he said to Jamal, who accompanied him. "We need to unite. We can't let this wave of injustice bring us down." "I'm with you," Jamal replied, clenching his fist in a gesture of solidarity. And so, as the trial approached, the city braced itself for a confrontation between the quest for justice and the pressure of a system that often failed to hear them. The courtroom was filled with a palpable tension, all eyes fixed on the defendant's stand where Michael sat, a shadow of the man who had assaulted Rachel. The room, usually a place of order and justice, pulsed with the contained energy of various emotions: anger, pain, hope. Rachel, with her head held high and her heart racing, knew that this moment was crucial, not only for her but for all who had suffered at the hands of a system that often let them down. The judge entered, and everyone stood in respect. Michael was nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the floor. The defense attorney, a middle-aged man with a confident expression, began to present his case. He spoke of the pressures police face in stressful situations and how Michael had acted in a moment of desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the attorney began, his voice firm, "my client is not a monster. He is a man who, like many others in his profession, faces immense challenges every day. What happened to Mrs. Rachel was a tragedy, but we must understand the context in which it occurred." Rachel watched with a mix of indignation and sadness. She knew the defense was trying to downplay the severity of his actions, but she would not allow her pain to be forgotten. When it was her turn to testify, she stood and walked to the podium, feeling the weight of all the eyes on her. "I am Mrs. Rachel Thompson," she began, her voice firm but slightly trembling, "and I am a victim of police brutality. What happened that night left me not only physically, but emotionally devastated." She looked at the jurors, trying to connect with them. "I am not just a case. I am a person who has family and friends. The violence I suffered was not an isolated act. It was part of a pattern of abuse that many in my community face. I am here to fight for justice, not just for myself, but for all who do not have a voice." Rachel's words echoed through the room, and some jury members appeared visibly moved. The prosecution attorney, a young man with a determined gaze, stood to cross-examine. "Rachel, can you describe what you felt during the assault?" he asked. "I felt powerless," Rachel replied, her voice thick. "I felt fear, but above all I felt anger. Anger at being seen as just a statistic, just another victim in this cycle of violence." The attorney nodded, understanding that he was touching on a sensitive point. "And do you believe this cycle can be interrupted?" "Yes," she affirmed with determination. "I believe we all have a responsibility to fight against injustice. That's why I'm here, so this doesn't happen to anyone else." Meanwhile, Michael watched everything from the defendant's stand. His heart weighed heavy with guilt and shame. He remembered each word Rachel had said, and the pain he had caused felt almost unbearable. When it was his turn to testify, he stood, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Michael," began the defense attorney, "can you tell us what happened that night?" Michael hesitated, his voice low and trembling. I lost control. I'm not that kind of person. I didn't want to do this, but I was so stressed, so pressured. Do you believe your profession justifies what happened? The defense attorney pressed. No, Michael replied quickly, looking the attorney in the eye. Nothing justifies what I did. Silence fell over the room, and Rachel felt a mix of relief and anger. Michael was facing his actions, but what did that mean for her? The battle between the quest for justice and the need to understand the complexities of human nature was becoming increasingly intense. Tyler, sitting at the back of the room, observed every movement, every word. He felt that he was witnessing not just a trial, but the struggle of a community. He knew he needed to act, but what could he do? The clamor for justice echoed in his mind, and he questioned whether he would be able to make a difference. The judge, at the end of Michael's testimony, signaled for the next witness. The room was about to transform, and everyone knew that what came next could change the trajectory of the case. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. The judge surveyed the room with a serious expression, while the spectators, including Rachel and Tyler, awaited the trial's continuation with bated breath. The courtroom was packed with supporters and opponents, all whispering to each other. But suddenly the murmurs ceased when a new witness was called to the stand. It was a young man with dark skin, a nervous but determined look on his face. Tyler recognized him instantly. It was Jamal, a friend who had grown up in the same neighborhood and had also witnessed the incident. You can tell us what you saw that day? The defense attorney asked, trying to sound calm, but the tension in his voice was palpable. Jamal took a deep breath, running his hand through his hair. I was there on the sidewalk. I saw Rachel and the police officer arguing. At first it seemed like just a heated discussion, but then he hit her. He wasn't alone. Other officers were with him. The defense attorney furrowed his brow. Other officers? Are you sure? Yes, Jamal confirmed, looking directly at the attorney. I saw at least 2 more officers. They just stood by and watched. No one did anything to help the woman. The courtroom fell silent as Jamal's revelations sank in among those present. Rachel felt her heart race. Michael wasn't alone, and the implications of this information were monumental. The prosecution attorney, sensing the gravity of the situation, interjected. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Jamal hesitated, his gaze drifting. I didn't want to get involved. I'm scared of what the police might do. But when I saw Rachel here, I knew I had to speak up. It's not right to stay silent. Rachel felt a wave of gratitude and relief wash over her. Jamal's courage was inspiring, but it also added a new layer of complexity to the case. Tyler observed intently, realizing that the fight for justice was becoming even more complicated. He knew that this new information could change everything, but he also feared the community's reaction. Can you describe the behavior of the other officers? The prosecution attorney continued with a more persuasive tone. Jamal nodded, his voice gaining strength. They were there, but they didn't intervene. They seemed complicit. And not only that, but when it was all over, I heard one of them say something like, he needed to show who's in charge. The courtroom was silent, and the atmosphere grew thick with tension. The judge, visibly disturbed, called for calm, but indignation was rising among the attendees. Tyler turned to Rachel, who was pale but had a determined look in her eyes. She knew the truth had to be revealed, no matter how painful. Emily, sitting in the back, watched everything with a mix of horror and confusion. How could her husband have been involved in something so sordid? She felt a knot in her throat, fighting back tears. This can't be true, she murmured to herself. The defense attorney, sensing his strategy crumbling, tried to divert attention. This young man is just trying to promote himself. You can't believe everything he says. He's not here to promote himself. Rachel stood up, her voice firm. He's here to tell the truth, and we all know that's what matters. The judge requested everyone to calm down and that the hearing should resume. But the tension in the air was palpable. Tyler felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that the truth was finally coming to light, but anger at how the system had seemingly protected Michael thus far. As the lawyers debated the impact of the new revelations, Jamal returned to his seat and Tyler stood up to approach him. Thank you for having the courage to speak, he said, his gaze sincere. You did the right thing. I just hope this helps Rachel, Jamal replied, his voice trembling but with a spark of determination in his eyes. I think we all need to be heard. The room was in a frenzy, but there was a new energy. The truth was beginning to unfold, and even in the shadows of brutality there was a glimpse of hope. Rachel knew the fight was far from over, but Jamal's courage ignited a flame within her. It was time to confront not just Michael, but the entire system that allowed such injustices to happen. The courtroom fell silent when the judge, with an impassive expression, announced his decision. Rachel, sitting in the front row, felt her heart tighten as the words echoed throughout the chamber. Guilty, but with a light sentence. A murmur of indignation began to spread among those present, and Rachel's eyes filled with tears. It was hard to believe that Michael, the man who had assaulted her, would receive a punishment that did not reflect the severity of his actions. "This is ridiculous," whispered a man next to Rachel, his face contorted in frustration. "Her life is worth more than that." Tyler, who was at the back of the courtroom, felt a chill in his stomach. He couldn't believe that justice had failed once again. In his mind, the image of Rachel's assault replayed like a distant echo, a constant reminder of the evil he couldn't prevent. When the sentence was read, anger surged within him. He stood up abruptly, drawing everyone's attention. "This is not justice," he shouted, his words reverberating through the room. "We are here to demand change, not to accept once again that police brutality is treated as a mere infraction." The judge banged the gavel, but the sound couldn't silence the growing indignation. Tyler knew he needed to take action, not just as a spectator. He turned to his friends who were with him and said, "We need to do something. We can't let this go unnoticed. It's time to raise our voices." Meanwhile, Rachel exchanged glances with Emily, Michael's wife, who was also present. Both felt the same pain and indignation, but from opposite sides of an invisible line. Emily stood up, her voice trembling but firm. "How can we allow this to happen? Society needs to understand the pain that police violence causes. We need change, and it starts here." On the way home, Tyler began planning his next move. He took out his phone and sent a message to his friends. "Tomorrow we're meeting to discuss ways to mobilize the community. We can't let this injustice go unnoticed. It's time for us to fight together." The next day, the city woke up to posters and banners proclaiming "Justice for Rachel" and "Say no to police brutality." Tyler and his friends gathered in a local park, where young and old began to join, forming an ever-growing crowd. He climbed onto a wooden crate, calling for silence. "We all know that what happened to Rachel is just the tip of the iceberg," Tyler said, his voice echoing among the attendees. "Police violence is not an isolated incident. It's a pattern that needs to be interrupted. Together we can make a difference." The crowd responded with applause and shouts of support. Tyler continued, "Let's organize a peaceful yet powerful protest. We need our voices to be heard, and the city must know that we won't stay silent." Meanwhile, Rachel and Emily met at a cafe, the atmosphere heavy between them. Both were aware that, despite their differences, they shared a common goal. Rachel took a deep breath and broke the silence. "Emily, we need to do something. It can't just be about me. We need to fight for all victims of police violence." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I agree, Rachel. Let's work together. We can create an initiative that fosters dialogue between the police and the community, something that really makes a difference." The idea began to take shape, and the two women united, determined to turn pain into action. They committed to organizing meetings, workshops, and campaigns that would allow people to share their experiences and build bridges between communities and law enforcement. At the climax of the story, while Tyler was leading the protest, Rachel and Emily stood there, united in a greater purpose. Michael, who had been watching everything from a distance, felt a wave of guilt and shame wash over him. He knew he needed to confront not only others but himself as well. When he approached Tyler after the protest, the tension was palpable. I'm sorry," Michael began, his voice trembling. "I failed you, Rachel, and everyone. I want to change." Tyler looked at him, anger still simmering inside. "Change doesn't come easy, Michael. You need to prove that you're willing to do this. It won't just be about saying sorry." "I'm ready for that," Michael said, sincerity in his eyes. "I'm ready to face the consequences of my actions and try to make amends for what I did." And so, each of them on their own journey of redemption and responsibility, began to understand that the fight for justice was an ongoing path, and that true change required courage, empathy, and collective action.